Welcome, I'm Denise Graves, and you're watching Opera America's Oral History Project.
Joe, let me get started here and just
Sure.
say,
Absolutely.
Joe Volpe, thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning. We are in association with our 50th anniversary, talking to people who have made a really indelible impression on American opera over the last half century. And you are clearly one of those people, and it's just so good for you to be with us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm consistent with the interviews, and I start with the question of who brought you to your first opera?
Well, there wasn't a who. What brought me to the first opera, actually? Although with my grandmother, I was aware of opera. The first opera that I actually attended or partially attended was in the Old Met. Was a Turandot with Nielsen and Corelli. And the reason was that I was the apprentice in the shop. So I never really went to the opera prior to that. I guess in 1964, I was 24 years old. And so that was the first occasion that I sat and watched an opera. And that was quite an opera to watch.
I was going to say not a bad performance.
Right.
So, your work brought you to the Met, and how did you get started at the Met? What brought you into the theater professionally?
I was working on Broadway, Mark, and I decided I really enjoyed working with scenery. So at that point, I had just given up a business I had. So I decided, well, my next venture is going to open up a shop to build scenery. And I was told the best scenery in the world is built at the Metropolitan Opera. So off I went to the Met as an apprentice in '64. And that's how it all started.
Wow. So you were going to start your own scene shop.
Right.
Wow.
That was the plan.
And is it true that at the time the Met was building the best scenery that could be seen?
I think so. Also considering that it was a repertory house, a lot of consideration had to be really, well, one really had to consider that every night there was a different show.
Yeah. Scenic design has progressed, and let me say, I'll put progressed in air quotes here because that could be subject to debate. Scenic design has moved so far in the days when you first started at the Met in 1964. What was scenery like? What was scenic design like in 1964?
Well, in the Met Brewery, as they called the building years ago, it was a very small, a small stage, no storage space. I mean, it was really, in a way, I think it was Gotti Kazaza that said he needed a new theater. And that goes back many, many years because of the problems of no rehearsal space, no storage space, no office space. I mean, scenery, as you know, was out on the sidewalk because they couldn't fit it into the stage. So the scenery was really, and in those days, it all started with painted drops, and then they were built flats with soft covered with, and then little by little, it progressed to built scenery. And I think if you consider Franco Zeffirelli's Falstaff, which was in '64, there were buildings. Now, the Lucia, which was a very heavy show built in the Old Met, to a point where there were certain scenic elements, if they did a matinee, they wouldn't even use it. They just cut the scenery out. We can't use that, it's a matinee. So little by little, it shifted from painted drops, painted scenery to built scenery. And the built scenery started in the Old Met. And then, of course, then there was an explosion of built scenery when the Met moved to Lincoln Center.
You know, you've referenced the old Met and the limitations of backstage. And in fact, I remember as a kid seeing scenery out on the sidewalk leaning against the back wall. Um, but of course, the house is legendary, partially because it was torn down so quickly.
Right.
Um, what was it like as an audience member? What was the theater like on the inside?
It was a thrill to be there. I mean, it was something that, and I've seen many theaters in my career now, but the old Met was a very special place. I mean, it really was. And that's why there was great resistance to it being torn down. But uh, the atmosphere, just the smell, what you were in a different world when you went into the Met at 39th Street.
I've heard that. And I was never inside, but I've heard that about it. And I guess the best equation that I can come up with is how wonderful it is to go to a sold out performance at Carnegie Hall. That you just realize that you are in a very special place with an incredible history, and where people are kind of crammed together to enjoy it together. Is that a reasonable analogy as to special feeling?
I think so. I mean, if I looked at years back photos, what the lobby was small, there were people waiting to get in. Rudolph Bing was out one winter serving coffee because, I mean, so it was a special place, uh, not for those who originally built it. For them, that was a matter of really social display, and you know that old story.
Yeah.
Uh, but no, it was. I mean, and people just eager to get in to see the performance.
You then sort of made the big move from 39th Street up to Lincoln Center. And I guess it was for scenic reasons, for backstage, for everybody behind the proscenium, just a transformative experience to move up to the new theater.
Well, if one was to quote Mr. Bing, I think it was a suicidal experience in his mind because of the trouble they had. Now, you have to consider they planned 9 new productions. 4 were to open in the first week: Antony, Cleopatra, Gioconda, Traviata, and I think it was Frau and Schatten. And when the real turntable broke down, that of course put everything off. They had to also rethink and reconceive some of the productions. But transformative, they went from a small theater to a facility they didn't even understand. I mean, Mr. Bing thought, oh, the Madame Butterfly house no longer has to be taken apart every day. We just send it down to storage. Sure, but it didn't fit in the elevator. This is the big stage elevator. So that's why, Mark, I was so lucky to be there at that time, being in the right place at the right time, they say, where starting with Antony Cleopatra, I was given opportunities that if it all went smoothly and everybody knew exactly how to run the place, I maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. But they didn't. And I mean, rehearsals would go on to 2 o'clock in the morning. So would you call that transformative? I mean, overtime, the budget was double.
Budgetarily transformative.
And they never realized that having all of the rehearsal rooms and all the space they wanted, which today probably is not enough, that it was going to be very costly, and the staff was not trained to have full-blown rehearsals in sea-level stage, the big rehearsal room, which is the size of the Met stage. So it was now, but once the administration, stagehands, everybody had a better understanding of how to operate in the building, that was really transformative, because then they could produce shows, they could rehearse. The orchestra had their own rehearsal room. The chorus had their own rehearsal room. There were staging rehearsals downstairs in sea level. So all those things made it possible for them to not only be more prepared when they went to the stage, but I think it made for better performances, better.
Did it take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years until you sort of figured it out?
I'd say about 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
2 or 3 years.
You know,
Um,
how do you react these days? Because in my college days, I was a backstage tour guide at the Met, and the Met was fairly new in those days, and it was by far the biggest, most sophisticated opera stage. And now you go backstage, whether it is at the Winsphere in Dallas, and you see all of that space, or the Opera Bastille in Paris, where it has yet more backstages. Um, does the after all of your decades at the Met, did the great new facility suddenly seem kind of old-fashioned or small compared to what's being built today?
well, I mean, if you take probably one of the greatest opera houses in the world in Copenhagen,
Yep.
um, you could say that the Met is a little outdated at this point because of the technical equipment, because of the way they really designed. Have you been to the opera house there or in Oslo?
I have been.
Okay, so you know where they can have rehearsals. You don't have to go downstairs to the sea level, as we call it. Everything can be done because all the space is on one level. That makes it incredibly efficient.
Yeah.
Where you can have a set off stage, they can rehearse, and then that same set on a wagon can be brought in. But I think with what's happening today, when you think of painted scenery and then built scenery, and now with projections and then and a new way of presenting opera, it could very well be that the next phase might be different.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but the point is that maybe you don't need as it evolved to be where we were in 1960.
That's a very, very interesting point. That's a very interesting point. And yet I'm also aware how often and how quickly the technology changes. So the more you are high tech, the more burdened you are by refreshing that technology and keeping things current and updated.
Yeah, and today, I mean, now the head electrician at the Met, given what happened with the pandemic, I mean, everything is so computerized with some production, and most of those people have gone on. They don't, and also people don't want to work night and day anymore today.
Yeah,
I know there's a worldwide problem, or at least a countrywide problem with hiring and staff, but because my son is the head electrician, and his very competent people, college graduates, they'll come, they'll set things up, they'll work opening night, but they don't want to be there all night long. They have a whole different view of their life today. So that too, it presents a problem.
it does. And that is certainly an issue with our many festivals, because when the festivals, which also work in rep, and you're rehearsing one opera, performing another opera, in a weekend you perform 3 or 4 operas, those are 20-hour schedules, if not 24-hour schedules.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to staff these days. Joe, when you were at the Met in your early decades, the roster of artists was just incredible. I mean, and I'm fortunate to have seen many of them: Nielsen and Rieseneck, Vickers, Sutherland, Price, Caballé. We could just go on and on and on about what the casts looked like. And I sometimes wonder if it is the rosy glasses of youth that make me think, whoa, those are real casts. Here you have this perspective. Were they that special in the 60s and 70s?
Well, Mark, it all depends on your memory. Where one would say, well, I remember when it was done in XYZ and they was so much better. I don't totally agree with that. If you consider Yes, Nielsen. I mean, you can mention Sutherland, you can mention names. They were incredible. I mean, no, they were. But if you think of in 1968, Domingo made his debut. Pavarotti made his debut. Uh, and look at the roster of singers there were in the Met, where you had Renee Fleming, you had Debbie Voigt. And I listen, and it's maybe some of the recordings. I happen to be listening to Andrea Chenier, and it was Richard Tucker. Richard Tucker never sounded better. Every time I ever heard him, of course, when I was worked with him, he was getting up in years. But I called his son. I said, Barry, I just heard your father on the radio, and he was just incredible. It was a Richard Tucker that I didn't know.
Yeah.
Of course, some of the others that you mentioned, Cavalier, Nielsen, et cetera, I did know. Corelli. I mean, so I was aware of those singers, but it was also the singers in my time. Let me stick with Luciano Pavarotti. When you mentioned Franco Corelli, he would bow down.
Really?
Oh yeah, because he said there was nothing like him. And I have, which I'm not supposed to, I have a video, audio of Nielsen and Corelli doing Turandot. And they were quite sensational. But I think today's singers are just as good. You'll find some that, I'm not going to say they're better, but what I am going to say is that there are plenty of singers today, or in my time, they're equal to the Tabaldis and everyone. And that's my opinion, of course.
Yeah, yeah. When speaking of Pavarotti, when you heard Pavarotti on the Met stage for the first time, did you say to yourself, "This is going to be, a headliner," or was he a young tenor and just history played out without your suspecting it would?
Well, to hear it from him, he made his debut in Bohème, and he had a bad night, he had a cold or whatever. And to hear it from him, he should not have sung that first performance. But of course, you knew. I mean, he even if he was not well, and I think it was mostly nerves, you knew he was going to be something. It had to be. I mean, just that's all there is to it.
How
I mean,
fabulous.
well, I mean,
So,
but there were some I've had my problems with. I mean, Anja Gheorghiu, who I think had the talent.
yeah.
But I mean, she does a recording with Schulte, and she starts telling him how to conduct it. Come on. I mean, yeah, that you didn't get in the old days. Well, maybe you did. Maybe you did. I shouldn't say that. But there are. I mean, I remember hearing Jane Eaglin. I mean, and Ben Hepner.
Yeah, yeah,
So there were some great singers.
yeah. So true. So true as you go through that roster. Now, you became the Mets general manager after nearly 25 years with the company.
Right.
And you knew it in the old house. You went through the trauma of moving to the new house. You knew the physical plant and its procedures inside and out. And then you became general manager. As well as you knew the company, were there still surprises for you of what it was like to be the general manager?
Of course. And it was interesting because Bruce Crawford was the president, or I think he was the chairman of the executive committee. But Bruce served for about 3 years as a general manager. Very knowledgeable, a very smart guy. But he discovered, we were in Japan, and I remember he said to me, "What am I doing here?" He says, "Jimmy's doing his thing. You're running the company." He said, "What am I doing here besides entertaining our Japanese hosts?" I said, "Well, that's your job." Yeah. So of course he left, but he gave me the opportunity to almost do everything that a general manager would do. But I never had to deal with the board members. I mean, I would make reports, but so board members dealing with personal issues or personnel, I don't know, personnel issues probably was the most difficult. Believe it or not, the easiest part for me was dealing with the performers.
Mhm.
I found, other than that odd performer, I shouldn't say odd. um, but
The rare, you mean the rare performer.
the rare, the rare. No, I had a great relationship with them and a close relationship. I remember when Renee was going through her difficulties and she was driving up on Broadway and made a left turn and somebody ran into her car and she called me and I got a car to take her home. I said, you have too much on your mind. Either you live in New York, stop Connecticut, stop going to Connecticut, or we have to have a car to pick you up because you're preparing or thinking about what you're doing at the Met and you're not concentrating on other things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I could do that. I mean, we grew up in a way together. She made her debut, my first year.
Yep.
But by the same token, Morella Franey talked to me like her brother. She said, "You're my brother," So I had that I wasn't prepared for, but it was probably one of the best parts of being the general manager. In my case,
sure,
there are general managers that have no relationship with the performers, but that was not me.
Yeah.
But I think board members, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. Donors, the more they give, the smarter they get. Because the more they give, they know your job. And that to me was the most difficult thing because how do you handle it? It's we had a board meeting. We televised Magic Flute, and one of the board members said, "Oh, I couldn't hear it. The audio was awful, and I couldn't see the picture." So my response was, "Do you still have a black and white TV?" That was not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that I was a little outspoken, I guess you might say, in certain occasions. But all in all, I think one of the biggest challenges was dealing with Lincoln Center because Herman Krawitz, and Herman was a mentor of mine. And so I'd ask him his advice about this, about that. And he said, Lincoln Center, they're a real estate holding company. Yeah. And that was his view. But the point is that with the Lincoln Center renovations was really difficult because I was the spokesman for the Met, but I was meeting with board members from other organizations, and they resented that. Mm-hmm. In a way, they resented, oh, we got the staff here telling them what they think, So there were things like that, I think, that were probably the most difficult.
Yeah.
In running the theater, I mean, I did that anyway. So
yep,
that worked well.
Good to hear about how Bruce Crawford had you do so much so that there was less that was new when you came in as general manager.
Yeah, Bruce, if I go in to see Bruce in the office, he said to me, the only time you see me was when there's a problem. I said, correct. That's absolutely right.
It made you the ideal employee. So, I also, note that you were walking in incredible footsteps. I mean, Gatti Gazazza is, legendary, from La Scala to the Met, and really important work at the Met. Rudolph Bing, another legend in our industry. Did you have role models? And if not a specific person, was there an amalgamation of role model ideas that you had as you were Met's general manager?
I would say Rudolph Bing was a specific person because he would mentor me. We were in Atlanta, my first tour with the company in 1967. And his assistants came over at the end of the performance. Oh, Mr. Volpe, Mr. Bing wishes to see you in the morning at 10 o'clock. and he'll meet you in the one of the principal dressing rooms. Oh, okay. So he discussed just my evaluation job or whatever. And then he said to me, well, how did Franco Corelli behave last night backstage? I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Bing, I wasn't paying attention. He said, I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Pay attention to everything from now on, because that's what this company is about. And you will learn if you pay attention. So he was giving me advice. Why? I have no idea. Maybe I didn't think he wasn't training me to move up, but he felt to get the most out of me and the most out of me to get the most out of the position. That's what I should do. And in many respects, we had a Booz Allen Hamilton, that came in. They did a study with George Moore at First National City Bank or whatever the bank was. And they found a way, Mark, that you didn't need two tellers. You have one teller do this and then the other. They had great efficiencies. So George Moore had them come to the Met, and Rudolph Bing assigned them to me in my department. After about a month or so, I sent him a memo, something to the effect that it's really not working. I'm not really sure what they think what they can accomplish. Bing sent the memo back to me and said, this is what you really want to say. And he rewrote it. Then I sent it to him. So about a week later, there's a meeting in George Moore's office. And I was sitting outside and they were discussing with George Moore, Rudolph Bing, and the Booz Allen people. And finally, Mr. Bing wishes you come in now. Yes, sir. So he was explaining how they were doing their efficiency work. And he said, tell me, in Lucia, the scene changed from 31 from 32. What have you calculated you need as manpower in the carpenter department? And they said, you need 32 men. He said, Mr. Volpe, how many men do you use? I said, 27. He said, you can leave now. And that was the end. that was the end of Booz Allen.
Wow.
He was really something.
Wow, that's just fabulous. So Mr. Bing is as a kind of role model as you thought about your own position.
Right. The other person greatly respected was Herbert von Karajan, because when we did Karajan's Ring, and I must have spent a month in Salzburg every time they opened one of the operas, just to watch him work. Not as a conductor,
right,
but just his involvement upstage. He's up on apparatus to do flying. He's here, he's there. He was really hands-on, incredible in a sense. And he also had a way with what I would call a Bingism. And that was because one of the players didn't have a suit and tie on, and Mr. Von Karajan said, Mr. So-and-so, you were supposed to be wearing. Well, I know, but my suit, I only have one. He says, you drive a BMW, it's outside. I suggest you sell it and buy some clothes.
Wow. Wow. But
So,
I mean, the through line between Mr. Bing and what you just said about Von Karajan is a kind of comprehensive attention to what's going on.
Right. Now, I mean, I know that many people did. I mean, Artist Kranick was terrific. I mean, I didn't work with Carol Fox really that much, but we did have the Association of International Directors of Opera, which was Everding, as you know, and Jonas Kaufman. And I must say, I had great respect for all of them. They were really hands-on involved. And so that said something to me.
Yeah, I mean, one could say the same thing about Kurt Adler, and just hands-on involved.
Right.
Yeah, deeply knowledgeable, and they paid attention to everything. Companies were somewhat simpler in those days. I mean, marketing departments and development departments, it was perhaps a little bit easier to have your hands on everything because it was somewhat simpler.
Well, but Mark, at the ballet today, my desk is loaded with papers because we have no staff. At the Met, I never had paper on my desk. It would come in. I had Sarah Billinghurst, I had Joe Clark, I had Stuart Pierce, and assistant managers. I would just send them. They did a tremendous amount of work for me, so it relieved me to have time to do things. Um, Today, I don't have any time. I'm working harder now than I did when I worked at the Met because we don't have any staff. I don't have an assistant. I don't have anybody to answer the phone. Emails, I have to struggle. I hate it. It's emails, but I love what I'm doing. Obviously.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I understand what you mean. Fewer staff means you just do more. The number of accomplishments during your tenure fill a couple of pages. And, I just made a few mentions in my notes about world premieres at the Met, Met premieres, the seatback translations, tessitura as a system that is, ubiquitous across the performing arts. Are there some of those accomplishments or others I didn't mention that you are most proud of?
Well, I think the seatbacks was, I'm very proud of that, the seatback translations. But I think I'm proud of what we did with expanding the repertoire. Yes, we had the world premieres and Met premieres. And I think that was a very positive thing for the Metropolitan Opera in those days. I'm particularly proud of the relationship I had with singers when they had difficulties, because I can recall many incidences where a soprano was having trouble with a director and storm off the stage and at a rehearsal and say, I'm not going on, I'm not going to work with him. And I was able to convince both parties to understand the pressures and issues that the other party was having. I was very proud of that. And it's always nice to hear from a fabulous singer, oh, I love you, you saved my life. It's always nice to save someone's life, so to speak. But no, I think also the staff that I left, which I thought they were very competent, and building that the administration was something that I was quite proud of also.
Yeah, I mean, just such a transformation of the institution in the years that you led it, really quite remarkable. But as you've mentioned, you've been in running a ballet company. Now,
yes.
I happen to know that Jean, your wife, is a ballet former dancer, and
Wow.
that's a one way that the door opened for you. But how do you come to be running a ballet company? And then I want to ask you whether it is more similar or more different than an opera company than you expected. How did this come to be?
When I came to Sarasota, and I would go to the opera, I was not comfortable going to performances because people would always come up and say, compare this, compare that. What about this singer? So I said to Jean, I really can't get too involved with the opera. So I met the director of the ballet and I said that maybe I could join their board, which I did. And then when their managing director left, Ian Webb asked me if I would help them out in 2016. And I became the executive director. And that was quite a few years ago. Now, there are a lot of problems are similar, particularly fundraising, of course, marketing, selling tickets, the staff, although we have a very small staff. But the satisfaction is that you set goals, and I set goals in 2016, and we are very close to achieving all of them. One is an endowment, which we did not have an endowment, a much stronger administrative staff, support for all of the artistic people. So in that respect, it is similar. The problem is in a town like Sarasota, where I don't want to say they're all snowbirds, but they are snowbirds. So your season is limited in some respect because people are not here year round. But as far as the nuts and bolts of whether you present ballet or opera, yes, there are different challenges, but it all boils down to the same thing, is that to present the best performances you can. So in that way, it's similar.
And the performances are quieter.
Well, that is true to a certain extent. There's only one good hall in Sarasota, that is the Little Opera House. Have you been to?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And of course, you know Richard Russell well.
Sure.
And the Van Wezel. Have you been to a performance?
I have. Yeah.
So it's kind of a strange place. I'm happy they're going to replace it. But yes, they're quieter, we can say.
Yeah, the dancers don't make quite as much noise on stage, at least.
Right.
And you already mentioned that, running a smaller organization. How big is the budget at the ballet?
$8 million.
Which is, a good mid-sized budget for an opera company, but you're
Right.
struck by, there aren't a whole lot of staff members, and the head of the company winds up doing a lot of the lifting.
Right. Well, it was interesting. We were doing an outdoor performance at Selby Gardens, which is, we set up a stage. It was New Year's Eve. It was by the water. And next thing, it was so damp that the dancers would slip and fall on the Molly floor. So who goes out and to clean the floor? Me and Ian Webb, the director. So we're out there cleaning. But that's just the way it is,
That's the way it is.
And quite frankly, I enjoy it.
That's great. Joe, I'm sure that aspiring performing arts administrators seek you out for advice about building their careers. What are the 2 or 3 biggest points of advice that you give rising talented managers?
And I would give this advice to anyone: make sure that whatever you're doing, you love to do it. Because if you don't love it, and when you're working your way up, if you are not excited in the morning about what you're going to face when you get to work, and there will always be many problems. If you can't deal with that, then you shouldn't pursue this career. And I tell everybody today, I teach patience. And one of my big donors said, "Where, in the hospital? What patience? You don't have any patience." I said, "I teach it. I don't have to practice it." But you have to learn to be very patient and let things develop. I used to hate the word Tony Bliss would use. Well, things have to evolve. I said, evolve is not in my vocabulary because you have to make business decisions, but things evolve and you have to be able to work with that. So, and then also learn as much about what's going on in every aspect of what's being produced. And that will make you feel more comfortable no matter what happens. I guess those are the couple of things that.
Great advice.